Welcome. I'd like to welcome everybody today to the Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church. And for you that don't come very often, I am not Zackrie. Just to quell your fears that some old white guy up here is here. So I'm Mike Cox. I'm the worship associate today. And we will see Zackrie, the candidate, ministerial candidate soon. So don't worry. It's going to be a Super Bowl procession coming in. So it should be exciting. But as we settle in and people get in here, I just wanted to share a couple of things of what's happened on this day. I always think it's interesting to see what's gone on in the world on this day, April 28th. Benito Mussolini died, dictator of Italy, in 1945. Jay Leno, comedian we all know, born in 1950. And for those boxing fans, Muhammad Ali, 67, refused to go into the draft that day. For you music fans, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, #1 on the charts in 1973. For those who were around in the Vietnam era, in this day in 1975, the last Americans were evacuated from Vietnam. And finally in 86, for those of you who follow disasters, Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred. So, given that, as you know, this gym isn't transformed into our sanctuary by some miracle faith, but by the many individuals who come together each Sunday to ensure we have a place that we can call home. And I want to first of all thank the Blue Herring team and the chair setup team for their work. I want to thank Vinny for the sound. I want to thank Jennifer, wherever you are, for the RE, and of course Chris. And also Kathleen, are you here? I don't know if Kathleen came today. There she is. Kathleen's a new office manager, and she continues to impress. She is very good, and thank you, Kathleen. But I really wanted to thank the Ministerial Search Committee. Could you stand up, please? Whoever's on the Ministerial Search Committee. Thank you. They really have done an amazing job in this work, and hours and hours. And while there's nobody up here yet, there is, I promise. I meant him momentarily. He does exist. So a couple reminders. After the service today, we're going to take a few minutes to rearrange things, and there's going to be a potluck, food, and then we're going to have a talent show. And Chris has got some great entertainment for us. And also during that time, we're going to have a Q&A. Jeff Phillips is going to do the Jerry Springer show here at the church with our new minister candidate, Zackrie. So that'll be entertaining if you've ever seen Jeff do that, which I have. He's very good. So please stay around for that. Now, for the next 60 minutes, allow yourself to forget about all those worries and crises that may be knocking at your door, and try to be present in this moment with your fellow travelers and friends. This is our time to feel safe and reflect on the words, music, and meditations, how they impact our lives and those around us. We are a green sanctuary and a welcoming congregation. So whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your heritage or culture, you are welcome here. Our community is better when you are here with us. If this is your first time to attend Cedars or you're a guest, we welcome you. As we do each Sunday, please take a few moments to greet your neighbors, giving special attention to those that you might not know. Thank you, everybody. And now, let a couple people filter in here. So let's take a deep breath and center ourselves as we welcome our candidate minister, Zackrie Vinczen. Zackrie. Right. Welcome. Welcome, Zackrie.
Thank you. Good morning. So I gather you all know why I'm here today. Show of hands, who knows why I'm here? Okay, most of you. So for anyone who didn't hear Mike or get the announcements, I'm being considered as the next called and settled minister here at Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church, which is very exciting. You're a congregation that seems very vibrant to me, and I think that we're going to be a good match in partnering in our shared ministry together. So for the next week, I get a chance to spend my time with all of you and get to know you in small settings and larger settings in our worship service today and next Sunday. But as we begin this journey together, as fellow travelers, as Mike put it, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the trajectory we're on for this week. So this week started, the planning for everything started a while ago. As you all know, the search committee has been busily working for quite some time, a year and a half, 2 years, to get to this point. And for me, as a minister, I have been working for several years to get to this point. Starting in January, there was, all the ministers started applying to churches. We sent our information out to people. We did initial video conference interviews, and then pre-candidates were invited to come spend weekends with people. And so Cedars was one of a few congregations that I got to spend a weekend with. And I met with your search team on that weekend and got to start learning a little bit more about who you were as a congregation. And the search committee started getting to know a little bit more about who I am as a minister. And I described it a little bit as sort of unwrapping a present or a mystery, that we're slowly peeling back these layers, trying to get a better understanding of what's in the wrapping, and then how that wrapping is going to fit into our lives together. So during my pre-candidating weekend, I had a chance to preach in Edmonds with the search committee there. And that Sunday, my sermon was about the power and possibility of transformation. And I shared some stories from both the epistles of Saul on the road to Damascus, and from the Buddhist tradition of the Prince Siddhartha awakening as the Buddha, and some of my own life journey, and sort of to illustrate the possibility of transformation that is present when we sort of embrace the world and keep ourselves open to change. Today, I'm going to speak about the power of our choices and our ability to make choices and shape the world. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about how transformation and our ability to make choices come together to sort of move us forward, and the role that leadership plays in that coming together. And so I tell you all this to sort of give you an idea of where this sort of sermons are going, and also to... My goal is that it'll give you all a chance to sort of learn a little bit more about me. Each of my sermons that I'll preach will have a bit of personal story in them, but also learn a little bit more about my philosophy and theology as a minister. And so the goal is to sort of, these sermons, while they are messages and lessons for everyone to take forth and to draw on their lives, it's really a chance for us to begin to know each other and seeing how my call to ministry fits in here at Cedars. And so, with that said, I just want to add that I am over the moon excited to be here with all of you. And I invite you to join today as we worship together. So come, let us worship together. And now, if you would please rise in body and or spirit as you are willing and or able, and join us in singing hymn number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In.
Also, before I started, I wanted to also welcome Zackrie's husband, Elliot Smith, who's not here, but who obviously is going to be welcomed into this congregation. So, Pat, he'll be here on next Sunday, so we'll get to meet him. So, I found over the past decade that small acts of thoughtfulness can make a real difference in people's lives. And I know you're sitting there going, yeah, duh, tell me something new. And yes, it is a self-evident truth, but for some of us who struggle to show our thanks and affection to people, the little acts of connecting with people are important. Over 10 years ago, I noticed at work that many of my friends and colleagues complained that they didn't feel valued. I'm sure this is a common theme in many organizations, and I'm guessing it probably occurs here at Cedars. I don't want to ask for a show of hands, but I'm sure it's here. As I reflected on this, I agreed that generally, people have their performance reviews by their supervisor and a general thank you by their bosses every year. But other than that, there's not much acknowledgement of their work. So I decided I would try and rectify that in my small little way. So around the first of each year, I would write a short, handwritten note to about 10 to 15 people, telling them why I valued their work and valued them. At first, I was nervous because I was afraid of exposing myself and thinking that people might think this is kind of weird. Well, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People were really appreciative of the small notes and thanked me for reaching out. And a positive unintended consequence was that I received feedback, which was always welcome. So I decided to extend this practice and write notes to people in my past who I'd lost touch with one reason for another every year. On one hand, I was amazed about how easy it was to find people on the internet, but on the other hand, it scared me to death to be able to find people so easily on the internet. So I wrote notes to people who I had fallen out with many years ago over certain transgressions that I had or they had. I wrote notes to childhood and college friends that I had lost touch with. I wrote notes to old girlfriends. And I wrote notes to my parents' friends who I had known during my childhood but had lost touch. As my experience at work, the majority of people were thankful for the small notes. And the ones who were the most thankful were the friends of my parents who wrote back, relating stories about my parents and me when I was young that I had never heard. Our everyday journey is unique to each of us, but I would submit a common need is to feel valued by family, friends, and community. I would challenge each of you to take a few moments when you can to remind people that you do value them. These small acts can make a huge difference in our everyday journey. So I dedicate the lighting of our chalice to small acts of kindness that provide others with the knowledge that they matter, they are loved, and they are important. So please join me in our affirmation. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to all people kindly, because there are brothers and sisters, to take good care of the earth, because it is our home, and to live lives full of love and kindness, because that is how we will all become the best that we can be. Thanks.
So at this time, I would like to invite all of those young and young of heart, all of our children and youth, or anyone who feels called to come forward onto the carpet and to join me for our story for all ages. How's everyone doing today? Good? Yeah, me too. I'm really excited to meet all of you. So, have any of you heard the story of the Good Samaritan before? I see a nod. What do you know about this story? It's okay. I'll tell it, and it'll maybe refresh your memory. And if anyone else doesn't know it, you'll get to learn it too. And if I forget something, will you help me remember? Okay, cool, it's a deal. So, who knows who Jesus was? A few more people. Cool. So, for our Unitarian Universalist ancestors, the people who came before us, Jesus was an ethical teacher. Someone who people believed came and taught us how to live a life so we could have more harmony and peace, more justice and love in our communities. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So, one of the ways that Jesus liked to teach for his followers was through telling stories or parables, little short examples of how we should live or be in relationship with each other. So, I'm sure that some of you have maybe heard some of these stories throughout your life, and they come up a lot, and if I end up here as your minister, we'll probably talk about a few of them over my time. But today, I want to talk about the story of the Good Samaritan. So, Jesus was with his followers, and they were all gathered together, and he was teaching among them. And while he was teaching, people kept coming forward, and they would ask him questions about, well, how should I live this way? Or what should I do about this? Or what does it mean to be in a relationship with someone? And he would answer them by telling one of these parables, and then people would listen and ask more questions. So as this was going on, one of the people in the crowd who was a lawyer and really liked to think about sort of the technical side of things, all the little fine details, came and wanted to ask Jesus a question. So he waited his turn and got up and asked Jesus and said, Jesus, how is it that I can find that great harmony, that source of enlightenment, or heaven, as they called it then, that we all are supposed to be seeking after? Tell me, teacher, how is it that I can find this principle that we are looking for? And Jesus paused and looked at the man and thought for a moment and said, what does it tell you in the books of the law that you should do in order to find heaven? And the lawyer thought for a moment and said, well, in the Torah, which is the book of the law that was followed, the scripture of the people at the time, it says that we should love God with all our heart and love our neighbor as ourselves. Sounds pretty simple. But the lawyer, being technical like he was, said, well, but who's my neighbor? Is it the person who lives right next door to me? Is it the person across the street? Is it everyone in my town or maybe my country? Or, where does it end? Who's my neighbor and who isn't? And so Jesus told the lawyer, listen, and started telling the story. He said, there once was a man who had to set out on a journey. He was going from the city of Jerusalem to the city of Jericho, which in those times was a big distance to travel. You had to do it mostly on foot, or if you were lucky, maybe you had a donkey or a camel to ride. But most people traveled by foot. So I think the distance is maybe about 20 miles. Could you imagine walking 20 miles on foot? No. Yeah? How would you feel? Yeah, so a marathon is longer, and people do that. It takes a lot of training to run that far. But I can say that for me, I'd probably be pretty tired after walking 20 miles in the hot sun on foot to get to the next town. And so that's what this man was doing. He was walking to the next town. And on the way, somewhere on the way, maybe he came around a bend in the road, some robbers came out of the bushes, and they surrounded the man. And the robbers said, give us your money. We're robbers. That's what we do. And so the man said, okay, here's my money. Take it. Well, another thing you should know was at the time, clothes were really, really expensive. And so the robbers said, well, this isn't enough. And so they took the man's clothes too. And they left the man, they roughed him up a little bit, and they left him just on the side of the road there with no clothes, no money. He's wounded now from being beat up, and they just left him there. The man laid down. He was tired, he was hurt, he was exhausted, and I imagine a little bit emotionally beat up too. So he laid down. As he's laying there in the hot sun, suddenly a man comes walking by. This wasn't just any man. This man was a priest, which at the time was someone who is kind of like a minister. They were responsible for sort of overseeing the religious services of the Jewish people in the temple. And this priest, who is supposed to be, dedicated to following the laws of the Torah and everything, this man sees the man laying in the ditch. The priest sees him there. And he looks down, crosses to the other side of the street away from him, and keeps walking. Does nothing to help him. So the man continues to lay in the ditch there, and another man comes. And this man they were called Levites, but they were the people who helped the priest. They were kind of like how Mike today is helping out. It's kind of where Mike and I are doing the service together. The Levites were like worship associates. They helped out with performing these services in the temple. And so this Levite man comes walking by, and as he's walking by, he sees the man laying down in the ditch, beat up and without any clothes. And he looks at him and crosses the street, and just like the priest, keeps walking without helping him or stopping. And so the man continues to lay there. Now, at this point, a third man comes. Now, this man was riding on a donkey. And the man was also, there was something unique about him, that he was a Samaritan. Now, Samaritans were people who lived in this area, in this town called Samaria, in this area. And Samaritans weren't too nice to anyone who wasn't a Samaritan. They only liked Samaritans. They only hung out with Samaritans. They lived in their town with only Samaritans. And so they had this reputation of not being too friendly to strangers. But as this Samaritan man on his donkey was riding, and he looked over and saw the man in the ditch, something inside of him stirred his heart. He felt this kind of tug. Have you ever felt something stir your heart? Maybe something is telling you inside of you, no?
Well, I felt like something I need to do,
Yeah. Well, maybe someday. We'll see. But this man on the donkey, the Samaritan, sees the man in the ditch, and he stops. And he gets off his donkey, and he goes over. And he takes some herbs, which would have been like medicine at the time, and some water, and some cloth, some linen, and he goes and cleans the man's wounds from when he got beat up by the robbers. He cleans them out and uses the cloth to bandage them. And then he helps the man up, gets him on his donkey, and together the two of them go to the city of Jericho. And when they reach Jericho, the Samaritan man takes the injured man on the donkey, and they go to an inn, it's like a hotel. It's a place where you can stay and get a meal and rest when you're traveling. And so they go to this inn, and the Samaritan man goes to the innkeeper and tells the innkeeper, the owner of the inn, I want you to look after this man. I want you to take care of him. Make sure he's fed and that his wounds heal. Make sure that he can rest. And whatever it costs, I will pay for it. And so the next day, the Samaritan left, and he left the injured man at the inn, and the injured man got better, and eventually he was able to continue the business that he had to do in Jericho. And a month later, the Samaritan man came back and went to the innkeeper and said, basically, how much is the bill? What do I owe you? How much did it cost to care for that man? And the innkeeper told him. And the Samaritan man paid the bill. And so, you got to remember, so Jesus was telling this story to the lawyers, or to the lawyer who asked him the question about how do we find that great harmony or that thing that we call heaven or enlightenment. And so when Jesus finished the story, Jesus asked the lawyer, which of the three men in the story, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, do you think was most loving to their neighbor? Can you guess which one it was? Which is it? Yeah. And that's what the lawyer said, well, the Samaritan. And Jesus said, remember that. Because it is those who are in need of compassion that are our neighbors. And so if you want to find that great peace and love and harmony in life, you should show compassion to those in your life who are most in need. So that's all the story I have for today. But I'll have another one for you next week. And I have the story today will kind of tie into my sermon that I'm going to share for everyone. I think maybe some of you know, but there's going to be no class for everyone today. So you're welcome to stay here on the carpet or go back to your seats. Or if you would like there and your parents are comfortable, I've heard that there's also childcare available if you want to go maybe play some games or be a little bit more active. But thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to meet all of you. And I'm going to be here for a week with you, getting to know everyone. So in that time, I really hope that if you have questions or anything comes up, I'm happy to talk with you because you're part of this community too. So thank you all. And
So on many Sundays, we make time for sharing joys and sorrows. So if you have a personal joy or sorrow that you'd like to share, please come forward, state your name in one or two sentences, talk about what your joy and sorrow is. And if you do, pour a little water in the bowl for a joy and a stone for a sorrow.
Spirit of life, Spirit of love, Spirit of laughter, great mystery that binds us one to another in that interconnected web of life. Be with us this day and remind us of those tethers that bind us one to another. Tethers of joy and sorrow shared in community. Tethers of hope of what is to come. And at times, even despair. Great mystery of all being. We ask that you help remind us this day of what is possible when we gather together in communities like this to share with loving hearts what is most precious and pressing on us. Great Spirit, this day we also ask for special blessings of love and light for all those in the Jewish community, especially those in San Diego who on the last day of Passover experienced a fatal shooting in their synagogue, leaving 1 dead and 3 injured, and moral injury present within the community. We ask that you be with the victims who died today in Seattle in the crane collapse. May their families find peace in this tragic time. We also pray and ask for blessings of the people of Mozambique, those who are in peril, the floods that are ravaging through their land. Great Spirit, great mystery. We know that at times life can be difficult, but we also know that together we can navigate these turbulent times. Help remind us of that more fully. At this time, I would like to invite you into a brief moment of silence, to let anything that is weighing on your heart to be said in the silent sanctuary of this space. For all the joys and sorrows that have been spoken today, and for those that still remain in the silence of our inner being, we say amen and blessed be.
Wow. Okay, Zackrie, you got to top that. Good luck.
Luckily, it's not a competition, but thank you. That was, wow. So before I start my sermon, I'm going to offer a short reading from the Bhagavad Gita that will come into the sermon later, along with the story I told, sort of vaguely come in with the story that I told the children. So this is a selection of readings I've edited together for length. Your concern should be with action, never with action's fruits. These should never motivate you, nor attachment to inaction. Not even for a moment does someone exist without acting. Even against one's own will, one acts, simply by the nature-born qualities of existence. They who have restrained their senses, but still sit and summon back to mind the sense objects, are said to be self-deluding. But they whose mind controls their senses, who undertake the discipline of action without attachment, they are renowned. You must act as bid, for action is better than non-action is. Not even the functions of our body could be sustained by non-action. The world is bound by action. So act in order to maintain the world. Your obligation is to act. So I remember riding the bus to school when I was a kid. My family lived at the end of the bus line in our rural county, Grays Harbor County, out on the coast here, which meant my sisters and I were some of the first kids to be picked up every morning and some of the last kids to be dropped off at the end of the day. The bus we rode was one of those old boxy buses and bounced roughly as it made its way along uneven chip seal roads. The heat on the bus was blasting, making everyone feel sick and sticky, or busted, causing us all to draw closer together as the windows fogged over. And there was always the constant twang of country music spilling out of the overhead speakers. Day after day, this same scene played out for the kids on this bus. The monotony of the journey caused us to invent all sorts of forms of entertainment, some of them not appropriate for sermons. But there was one period in these creative entertainment sessions that stands out in my memory the most. It was a span of time in which several of us kids on the bus discovered the R.L. Stine Give Yourself Goosebumps book series. These books were in the genre of choose your own adventure. Honestly, they were more of a game than what you would call literature. The goal was to make choices and navigate yourself to the end of the book. The books usually open with a few pages of narration, setting the scene, and giving you an idea of sort of what the book was going to be about. And then you'd be asked to make a choice. Do you go through door number 1 or door number 2? Do you take the path on the left or the right? Do you go toward that strange and scary noise or run away? Each choice would give you a corresponding page to turn to, telling you what happened next. If you didn't make a choice, the story simply didn't progress. You just paused there until finally you got up the nerve to choose between page 78 or 25. And that choice would decide your fate. Of course, if you didn't like the fate you were dealt, you could always just go back and cheat by choosing another option. The difference between these books and life, I've learned, is that life doesn't just pause if we don't make a choice. The story keeps going with us as characters in it, whether or not we like it. Whether or not you choose to undertake that project or task you've been putting off, life goes on. And then there are those situations in life where maybe we're not even presented a choice. The days keep coming and situations keep unfolding, and we kind of feel like we're just somehow being pushed along by the current, regardless of how we feel about it. The world is bound by action. This truth was put forth in the reading I offered earlier from the Bhagavad Gita. And before I go further into sort of the point that I'm hoping to reach today, it might be helpful for me to put this reading into sort of its larger context. The Gita opens soon after the death of a king who had no children to inherit the throne. After his death, it didn't take long for two cousins, both who had rightful claims to the throne according to the line of succession. It didn't take long for these two cousins to start fighting. But neither of these cousins in their fighting could decide who should ascend to the throne and who should yield. Soon, everyone in the family was drawn into this conflict, and they found themselves divided into two factions, siding with one of the two cousins. Finally, after this had gone on for some time, the cousins agreed that they would settle this dispute by playing a game of dice. They decided whoever won the game of dice would rule for 12 years with the family that sided with them, while the other cousin and the rest of the family went and dwelled in the wilderness. And then after the 12-year period, they would switch, and so on and so forth and so on, thus sharing rulership of the kingdom and the throne, and everything would be great. However, after the end of the first 12-year period, the cousin who had been ruling didn't want to give up the throne. Go figure. After trying to negotiate and resolve the matter, it was decided that this dispute could only be settled by going into battle. As the battle was about to start, one of the participants in the battle who had been living in the wilderness for 12 years, Arjuna, felt conflicted. He didn't want to fight against his own family. Even if part of them hadn't kept their word, he didn't want to fight. Arjuna also knew that if he didn't fight, he would be disgraced and banished. You see, he was of the warrior class, which in this society at that time meant that you were obliged to go into battle when you were called upon. These competing realities left the young warrior in a situation with no good outcomes. He knew whatever choice he made, it couldn't be undone once he made it. He couldn't just turn back the pages and choose another option. In this moment of internal conflict, Lord Krishna came in a vision to Arjuna. And Arjuna expressed his anxieties about this situation to Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna listened and then began to lecture Arjuna, saying, "Your concern should be with action, never with an action's fruits. These should never motivate you, nor your attachment to inaction. Not even for a moment does someone exist without acting. This world is bound by action." In the end, Arjuna realizes that the battle is going to rage on with or without his participation. And so he decides, according to the customs of their culture, that he is honor bound to fight and set right the wrong committed. For me, the heart of this story is not about our duty to go into physical battle with one another to right wrongs. This aspect of the text is, in my opinion, better left in the time and place that it was put forth. But on a deeper level, the Gita speaks of the importance of being an active participant in the world. It speaks about setting aside our anxieties about making the right choice or starting something new or taking on that project and allowing our values to guide our actions. When this becomes the way that we move in the world, we'll be able to make decisions and act positively without stopping to think about outcomes. Because every action we make will flow naturally from the principles we hold at the core of our being. So I'm going to jump back in my life just a few years here. So one night when I was still in high school, I was about 18 years old, and I was home, and that night I was feeling particularly annoyed by my 4 sisters and all their friends who were in the house. To escape this annoyance, I decided to take a walk. Putting on my shoes, I left out the front door. I wasn't really sure where I was going. I just needed to get away. I made my way to the main road and started to walk towards town. The sun began to set, and soon I found myself in the dark. As my eyes adjusted to the lack of light, I noticed something in the road up ahead of me. At first I thought it might be a deer. It was pretty common on this stretch of road for someone to hit a deer and to find the deer's carcass laying in the road. So I didn't think much of it as I continued to walk. But then, as I got closer, I started to second guess my initial judgment. Is that a person? I thought out loud. I broke into a jog as I approached, and my fear was confirmed. It was a man laying in the middle of the road. He was soaking wet. I shook him. He didn't respond. I checked his pulse and could feel the beat of life still in his veins. I shook him again, and this seemed to rouse him. He was belligerent as I asked him if he could move. "Yes," he responded gruffly. "Good. Let's get you out of the road." "No. Leave me here. I want to die." "I'm not just going to leave you here," I snapped back. "Why not?" "Because that's not the sort of person I am. I couldn't live with myself if I just left you here, laying in the middle of the road like that." It took some persistence on my part, but finally, the man agreed to move out of the road. It was a struggle to get him up. He was obviously intoxicated. Together, I staggered with him to a gravel pull-off not far from where he laid. I sat him down and asked his name. "David," he responded. "I'm Zach. It's nice to meet you, David. What are you doing in the middle of the road?" "I just want to die." "Why would you want that?" "I'm just tired of it all." At this point, David began to get worked up. I reached in my pocket and pulled out my cell phone and checked it. There was no service. And I didn't know what to do at this point, and so I decided to just sit and wait with David. I was hoping a car would pass by soon and I could flag them down and have them go get help. I was afraid to leave him there. As I sat waiting, David began to cry. He looked at me and asked a question I've never been asked before. Are you an angel? No, I'm not an angel, I responded. But you came out of nowhere and saved me. I just happened to be walking by. We continued to talk, but most of the conversation was incoherent. Finally, I saw headlights coming our way. As the car approached, I pulled out my cell phone and began waving it in the night, hoping that the light from the screen would catch their attention and they would stop. A black truck stopped. I began to explain to the driver what was going on and asked if they could go up the road and call for help. Instead of helping, the driver told me, just let him die. Rolled up their window and drove off. I spent the next few minutes, if I'm honest, yelling obscenities into the night after the truck. How could someone have such disregard for life? I wondered. David seemed completely unaware of what had transpired. Eventually, another car stopped and agreed to call 911 and then drove off. A cop car arrived shortly thereafter and took things from there. The two police officers put David in the back of their car, and I continued walking. When I finally reached a place where I had cell phone service, I called a friend who came and picked me up. That night, I had no idea what was in store for me when I left my house. And I had no experience dealing with a situation like this. But I didn't let that stop me from being of help. The choice was there in front of me. And I had no time to think. I simply acted and did what I felt was the right thing to do in the situation. I could have been like the guy in the truck or the priest and the Levite on the road to Jericho. But I could have just kept walking. But in that moment, the thought didn't even cross my mind. Somehow, I felt obligated towards this man. Like something in the core of me just knew it was the right thing to do, and I did it. Looking back, there are things that I probably could have handled a little bit better. I didn't take any precautions for my own safety. What happened if David had a gun or a knife or gone berserk on me and injured me? But those thoughts in the moment as the situation presented itself didn't even occur. I saw a need. I felt my values stir in my being, and I acted. To this day, I still believe that if I had chosen to do nothing that night and walked away instead of stopping and inconveniencing myself, David likely would have been killed. You can only lay in the middle of a road for so long at night before someone runs you over. I don't know what happened to David after that. I hope somehow me taking action had a positive effect on his life. Regardless of the outcome, however, I still hold that I made the right choice because I know that the choice I made flowed from my belief that life is valuable and that each person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Thankfully, most of us in our daily lives aren't faced with the sort of decision-making required in the story I just shared with you. or that from the Bhagavad Gita, where we have to choose between going into battle and fighting our own family or being banished in disgrace. Thankfully, those are realities that day to day we aren't forced to face. Still, both of these stories for me illustrate how making choices makes a difference. Working to correct a wrong or even saving a life. They also speak of the importance of holding our values at the center of our being, so that when a choice presents itself, we do not hesitate to act. This reality reminds me of something else that Lord Krishna said to Arjuna. Krishna said, "Whatever the best leader does, those who follow will also do. Everyone will fall behind the standard such a leader sets." And I believe that the best leaders make themselves known not by the words that they share, but by the actions and choices they take. So, next time you find yourself in a situation where you must choose between action or inaction, I'd encourage you to just take a breath and ask, what is my heart telling me to do? What is my heart telling me to do? Listen to this voice, for it's the voice that speaks from the place of our deepest self. In doing this, we become the leaders, the ones who set the standard of what it means to be of service to each other and the world. A people who act from a place disconnected from receiving praise or glory, but rather act because it's what our heart is telling us to do. Informed by our values in this way, I truly do believe that we have the power to turn our lives into something more than just a simple series of choices, but rather to help make the world a manifestation of our deepest held values and beliefs. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be. So at this time, I would like you to rise in body and or spirit and join us in singing our closing hymn, hymn number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Keep standing, make mutual contact as you're comfortable, and repeat after me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
Extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our service today has ended, but our service to one another and the world has begun anew. As we go forth, may we go forth in the spirit of peace and love until we meet again.